So I guess it's my role at last now to tell you a little bit about DARIAH-EU or the DARIAH-ERIC. You'll know the difference between those by the end of this presentation. I hope there will be a quiz. And to tell you a little bit about the past, where we came from, the present, maybe where we are, and then I'd hope in the discussion maybe we can get towards the future a little bit as to what we might do together, and maybe you can help us sort of think through this whole idea of what it means to be a European research infrastructure who is in the process of looking at, well, if knowledge is global, what that means. So first, to give you the sort of the headline definition. So DARIAH is a pan-European digital research infrastructure for the arts and humanities, constituted as a formal consortium of 17 member countries. Now, we were talking before about having that elevator pitch, that kind of, that clear brand identity. This is not it, okay? This is something that makes sense to us, but there has been a certain, I don't want to call it a criticism, but almost a bemusement within the European Commission about DARIAH from time to time, saying, well, we're not really sure what you do, and you seem very chaotic to us, but we know it works. So maybe having the dry language is helpful to us in that way. But of course, talking about research infrastructure, I believe, who was it? One of the speakers had to define research infrastructure very clearly, and I think that's a very wise move, because I also have a kind of a research interest in research infrastructure, because, why not be meta if you're going to live in the world today? And I've pulled out a number of definitions about research infrastructures. And in the full version of this talk, this goes over 3 or 4 slides. But in the 20-minute version, I've distilled down the things that research infrastructures have. And they have. Are you ready? Facilities, resources, human resources, services, equipment, instruments, collections, archives, databases, structured information systems, grid computing, software, middleware, information, expertise, standards, policies, tools, knowledge, data, people, a wide user base, standardized paths, and protocols. I haven't put it, yeah, thank you. I need to put it to music, I haven't gotten there yet. And even in individual definitions, you will often find what I call the definition by comma delimited field. It has X, comma Y, comma Z, and it really led me to believe that infrastructures, research infrastructures, are kind of like elephants, and we're kind of like blind men, and that we approach them and we're like, I was looking for a wall. Thank God that research infrastructures are walls. Or, I was looking for a sharp pointy thing. Thank God that research infrastructures are sharp pointy things. And that different user communities will find different things in the research infrastructure. And again, since the tendency, as we were saying in the last session, is for a research infrastructure to fade into the background if it's doing its job correctly, then there leads to this tendency for there to be different impressions about what we are and what we do. So, the other question that comes up, and I'm actually, even my DARIAH logo, my little nice thing on the bottom are going, well, I tell you, here I could have had no slides, but now I have slides that I'm sort of obsessing over. And one of the other things that we work a lot with in terms of the concept is, who is our user community? And actually, our user community is not the digital humanities. Our user community is the arts and humanities. But we actually deal with the digital aspects of that work, the places where the digital is encroaching upon, influencing, adding to, or in some ways changing the research practices of the arts and humanities. And for us, this is a very crucial difference, because we don't want to be just to be tuned only to a very small group, because we believe that probably it's true that every humanist, every arts researcher now has some aspect of digitality in their work. If it's only in the fact that the publishing processes we deal with now are hugely influenced by the digital medium. And of course the fact that, I really like this quote about the fact that the digital black box means that digital models can be imposed upon researchers whose needs in terms of information processing are too often not explained concretely. And we were talking at the break a little bit about these discussions that you all know if you work in this area, where one person says data, the other person says data, everybody thinks they agree, and you find out 3 months later they meant completely different things. So the idea is that we can find a way of easing these relationships as a research infrastructure, which, well, given that research infrastructures are everything and then potentially nothing, that works. But actually, for us, it gives us a unique position in an ecosystem where we want to have an impact. But, of course, building a research infrastructure around this set of needs and around this set of users is going to be different. And you end up with kind of research infrastructure jealousy. I go to a lot of meetings where there are these research infrastructures and they put pictures up and they have their telescope or they have their great big hole in the ground full of concrete. And I don't have that. In fact, when they did a little film about research infrastructure for the launch of the more recent S3 roadmap, and you'll know what that is in just a few minutes, they had 3 images for every area. We're in cultural and social innovation. And the 3 images they had for my area was a person looking this direction. Okay, so a person, that's good. A kind of a drawing of a person looking this direction. Okay, so we have people looking in directions, a pile of money, and a person with a nurse. It was strange. So Arts Humanities doesn't photograph well. There's reasons for that as well. But we know that we have to construe ourselves to add value in a different way from CERN, from the European Spallation Source, from all of these other kinds of research infrastructures. But also, the tension between the desire to fund research infrastructure as capital and say, right, it's CapEx, one and done, the money's out, it's finished. But technology doesn't let us do that. We always have to be responsive. We always have to be agile. We always have to be prepared to grow and change as well. So, no mean feat. But to understand where DARIAH comes from, I need to go back a little bit. I need to go back to 2006. We all remember 2006, that great year for research infrastructure, right? You were all hanging out with research infrastructures back in 2006? Of course you were. 2 things happened in 2006 that make me think, okay, this is really where we started to change the way we thought in North America and in Europe about research infrastructure. In North America, you had the publication of our Cultural Commonwealth, which you probably have run across at some point. So this was the follow-up to the so-called Atkins report, which was about research infrastructure widely. And this was the follow-on report that was looking at cyber infrastructure for cultural research, basically for the arts and humanities. Then on the European side, we had something slightly different. We were a little bit behind, so this is the more generic step. But we had the publication of the S3 roadmap, the European Strategy Forum for Research Infrastructure. Now, before that, there had always been funding available for research infrastructure, but it was very haphazard. And you'd kind of hear that there was this archive in Norway who had this funding where people could just go and do research there. And you'd ask them, how did you get this money? They'd go, oh, we're a designated research infrastructure. And you'd think, wow, I want to be one of those too. But it was very much a matter of people would hear about the funding, they'd apply, and there was no sort of system. There was no actual sense of why one would be on the funding and one would not be. And this was what the S3 roadmap was responding to. They said, okay, we have requirements in Europe, and we're going to build them from the top down, and we're going to build them together. So just a couple of brief notes about these 2 really key documents. I think it's actually interesting to look back at the recommendations from our Cultural Commonwealth, because one of the things you notice is that a lot of these are still really germane. So the work that John Unsworth and his colleagues did, I think the necessary characteristics are still really clear. It has to be sustainable. How many research infrastructure, how much have we been talking today about people who build things that become tools that maybe are things that people need and use, but there's no sustainable business or user model or funding model underpinning it. And that it be interoperable and collaborative and support experimentation. These are important things. But I also find ideas like the recommendation around number 3, the fact that it should be cooperation between the public and private sectors underpinning it. It's a lot of really good ideas that certainly within DARIAH we know we still have to work on. And I think it's interesting how in 12 plus years, 13 plus years, we still have a long way to go to achieve that vision. And similarly with the S3 roadmap. So the S3 roadmap's in an interesting position right now where it continues to grow. So as you'll see, as of 2016, our own DARIAH is what's known as a landmark, which means we've kind of, we've left the cart path and we've gone down the superhighway and we've kind of parked by the side of the road. So we're now a landmark on the side of the road, which means they consider us to be successful and mature and developed. But new entrants keep coming onto the roadmap. So this is kind of sense of an increasing body of research infrastructures that will grow. But to go back to our own path through this, in 2006, we were on that first S3 roadmap, along with Clarin, which I think got mentioned earlier today, which is a similar research infrastructure for linguistic resources, and something called EROS. And I think this is really interesting, the European Research Observatory for the Humanities. And EROS actually never even reached the launch phase. And again, there's an interesting question there as to whether or not part of DARIAH's success is this focus on the digitality. As I mentioned, it's not the thing that we focus on. We focus on, as our users, the arts and humanities. But the fact that we have this common thread of the digital bringing us together puts us in a lot of interesting places. And oftentimes in places where people are feeling just a little bit of pain, a little bit of tension or friction, coming either from the policy side or coming from their own methodological inclinations or from a lack of knowledge. So this is part of what we see as how we can define our strategy and our role, which I'll come to again later. So we had some preparatory phase funding, and this is the way it works on the S3 roadmap. So you do some work sometimes in a starting or advanced community. So the research infrastructure for Holocaust studies, which has been mentioned, started as an advanced community and is now on the roadmap to become one of these ERIC infrastructures. And really after that, you transition into the phase of an ERIC, where your funding moves from coming directly from the commission to coming from your members. But it's interesting to understand this ERIC. So I'm going to introduce you also to the ERIC. This is Eric. I call him Eric. It's actually not Eric. So this is Eric. This is the real Eric. So interestingly enough, in order to allow the countries of Europe to build research infrastructures together, they had to invent a new legal instrument. Now, those of you who know how Europe works may say, oh, well, they just really wanted to invent a new legal instrument because why not? But the idea was that you could have this enabling structure to let countries work together on research infrastructure, and that would help to deliver on this idea of how you could actually facilitate from the top down something which in essence had to come from the bottom up. But when you look at how this ERIC instrument has been used, you could also start to see some of the ways we achieve that difference. Remember I said that DARIAH was going to be different, but exactly how was a question for us to answer. So if we look at the first 6 ERICs, we were probably, I don't know, I think, what did we decide, Sally? We were number 8 or something like that. So looking at the first 6, and this is in the era around 2011, 2013, we became an ERIC in 2014. So these are the first 6. I mean, they're quite broad-based in terms of disciplines. So ECRAN is for clinical research, SHARE is for aging research, European Social Survey was a sort of a long-standing set of partners working on these common social survey instruments, Clarin, as I mentioned, for linguistics, BBMRI for biology, etc. And what is striking when you look at how DARIAH used this instrument and used the tools differently is that we built something that had a hierarchy. We built according to the instrument. We built an organizational structure for ourselves that also had this really interesting marketplace element. And I'll talk more about what I mean as a marketplace element alongside. And some of the differences you can see, and first of all, if you look at our funding model, most of the ERICs will not have a strong in-kind contribution. They will be a cash contribution to the center, and then the center uses that funding to provide services, whether they are connecting data sets or whether they are building data sets or building the big hole in the ground, whatever it happens to be. Within DARIAH, 90% of what an individual member country contributes is in-kind, because we believe that we've had knowledge infrastructures for a very long time. And you know, I often go to policy meetings where I'm told, well, the arts and humanities have come very late to research infrastructure. And I'm like, Library of Alexandria, anybody else got something going back that far? I can be a bit cranky in policy meetings. So the idea that the methods are coming out of the research performing organizations, the data is most likely held in the cultural heritage institutions, we weren't going to build the same thing again. And of course, because this is arts and humanities, we have a lot of disciplines, we have a lot of languages, we have a cultural specificity that's really important to us. So this is one of the ways that we preserve that, and one of the ways that we make a strong organization out of these disparate parts. A second aspect of how we use this ERIC instrument to do something slightly different, I think, is shown by the number of founding members we had as signatories. So, you know, in the first 6 ERICs, European Social Survey was a bit of an outlier because they'd been operating for a long time. But, you know, ECRIN had 5, SHARE had 5, you know, BBMRI had 12. We started with 15 and very quickly added another 2. So we're at 17 members now. And looking, touch wood, if there's any wood here, to bring in another 2, potentially this coming May, which will bring us very close to 20 members. And that's quite substantial, and again, a substantial organizational challenge. And how we work with all of this is really interesting. So there on the kind of the far side, you really do have that stack, that hierarchy, where we have the staff, and mind you, DARIAH is not a big organization in terms of staff. I think we have about 12 people, about 10 FTEs. And then when you actually then add in all of the volunteers, people involved in various projects, people involved in various committees and boards, people involved in working groups, people involved in national organizations, you come close to about 1,000 contributors who are being sort of organized and chivied by these 10 people. So it's quite a lean organization, but we do have a traditional structure. But then you have this other side, the right-hand side. And it was already mentioned today that we have 4 virtual competency centers. And these virtual competency centers, VCC1, which is about the technical infrastructure, VCC2, which is about research and education, VCC3, which is about data, VCC4, which is about outreach. And if you think about those as kind of facing outwards, the kind of the 4 doors in which people tend to come into DARIAH. They come in because they want to build infrastructure. That tends to be the technical door. They come in because they're a researcher in an arts humanities discipline or subject, or because they're coming to it from a research question. They tend to come in through VCC2, or they're coming from a collections holding institution or from a data building, a collections building perspective, that's VCC3, or they're coming from a policy perspective, so they're coming through VCC4. So these are our competencies, and we bring these people together, and they act as a kind of a quality assurance point, or a quality assurance mechanism for the organization, but they also act as sort of like the place where the train points all come together, the little rotary thing where the engine gets spun around, because working around them, you have all of these different inputs to the organization. You have our short-term funded projects, which we use to launch new activities, which we then later embed. We have our transnational working groups, which Sally Chambers will say a bit more about tomorrow. And also we have contributions coming in from our national members. So we have all of this best practice, all of these ideas, these tools, these services that are contributed via these different mechanisms into this central pot, in which we then can all use and coordinate and reuse in a manner that suits us. So that's really where we are. That's how we've constituted ourselves statutorily, and that's sort of where we got to as of about 5-6 years ago. And it's been that kind of period of 5 years of living with this structure as the DARIAH-ERIC that has brought us to where we are. But now we're in what is called the implementation phase. I don't know why they call it that, but we're implemented now, and we're now into the operational phase. And so being in operational phase makes us think, well, actually, we know who we are now. We know, actually, we have the confidence to say, we're never going to be CERN. We're never going to be a national library. But we do actually have a very distinct role to play, which brings us to the strategic plan, which we've been working on the past couple of years, and which we'll actually be bringing to our General Assembly in May for final acceptance. So this is really our roadmap for the next 7 years. And this is our way of saying, right, this is where we can uniquely do something that provides that infrastructural layer. If we can't say what it is, then we can say what it does. And what it does is it makes it possible for everyone to start from a higher baseline. So, and of course, you know, in some cases, that baseline will be a little bit higher still. For example, if there's a working group that you're working with, you're going to have a slightly more specialized access to that. But generally, we think that the best thing that we can do is provide this connective structure within the very distributed, some would say fragmented, landscape of arts and humanities research. And the 4 ways we do that are via the marketplace for quality assured tools, services, and data, by having transnational scientific working groups, and other forms of transnational organization, which obviously are difficult to do if you're coming from an institutional perspective. We do training and professional development for all career stages, not the way a university would do it, but to fill certain niches. And we do policy and foresight work. And to give you a sense of how this works, I thought rather than kind of giving you a presentation on each of the 4 of these, I'm going to give you one of the problems that we're facing, one of the challenges we're facing right now, and how DARIAH is working to make that challenge into an opportunity for our research base. So there is this thing called the European Open Science Cloud. How many of you know what the European Open Science Cloud, well, is supposed to be? Because I don't know if it actually is anything yet, although we talk about it a lot. So the European Open Science Cloud started as a vision a few years ago, and largely the vision of our research commissioner, Carlos Moedas. And he basically decided, you know, he was looking at the example of the Republic of Letters, you know, this whole Enlightenment idea that by sharing information across these distributed networks, a whole new era of knowledge, of wisdom, of the sharing of insight came about. And he thought, we need that again. But this time, of course, we're not going to write letters, we're going to have data. And so the idea emerged as a part of his platform on open science, which is a part of the platform on open science, open to the world, open innovation. No structure is too complex. The whole idea was that we would have this European Open Science Cloud, which some have said is not European, not open, not about science, and not a cloud. But again, you can read into the literature about that, where all researchers, and of course all researchers read funded researchers working on research projects. You know, again, there's lots of caveats that go into that. They tend to forget that humanists tend to actually work for their salary. But work with me for a moment, would be putting their research data into this one shared repository, and through that we could have these exciting and groundbreaking innovations at the intersection of the disciplines, and thereby achieving the new Republic of Letters, or the Republic of Data, I suppose you could call it. But the problem is, from my point of view, as somebody who works for a research infrastructure for the arts and humanities, is that first of all, we can't always share our data. That data may be owned by a cultural heritage institution. That data may be owned by a publisher. That data may be owned by an individual. And I can't say, well, this is my research data, and I'm just going to deposit it because it's my research data and because I have to. So there's a problem there, and the DARIAH Data Reuse Charter was already mentioned. This is one of the things we're doing in order to try and address this problem. I'll come back to that in a minute. We don't always use data the way other disciplines do. I will come back to that. And sometimes we don't even recognize our sources as data. I'll come back to that as well. And of course, if the vision is that we're all going to just suddenly become massively interdisciplinary, we're neither taught nor rewarded to do that. And that actually, I think, applies to all the disciplines and not just to the arts and humanities. So we have this massive policy development happening at the European level. The arts and humanities are not really a part of that discussion, or at least they hadn't been. The average arts and humanities researcher in Europe will have no idea what the European Open Science Cloud is. So what does a research infrastructure that is digitally inclined for the arts and humanities do in a case like this? Well, first thing we do is we build the DARIAH Marketplace, which is now called the Social Sciences and Humanities Open Cloud, because it's being built in the context of a project called SHOCK. So again, the first thing we did was we built the kinds of linkages we would need to do this really well. And in that, however, we've been able to stay true to the original vision for this marketplace, that we would share tools, services, and data, but to improve upon existing models, because there have been many. That we'd contribute to the democratization of digital approaches. We'd create visibility, promote reuse, sustainability for the national contributions, remember that in-kind contribution, and we'd also have this humanist tailored response to the European Open Science Cloud. Now, you probably know, you guys know Bamboo Dirt? Yeah, the Bamboo Project, which was one of these great research infrastructure ideas that actually, actually there's been a great article written about it by Quinn Dombrowski about why bamboo failed, essentially. So that was just construed in the wrong way and ended up having its legacy as essentially a list of links. So we look at examples like this and the many others that are out there, and we say, okay, the weaknesses that we can overcome because of how we're constituted is, first of all, we can put a community basis behind this because we have the national in-kinds as a core of services. We can put a quality control mechanism behind it because we have these virtual competency centers sitting together as our joint research committee. We can build context in and a kind of a sort of an app store model because we have other assets we can add to enhance and explain and make more usable and show the use cases for various tools. And of course, we can put the reuse imperative behind it because this is how we're harnessing that challenge of the European Open Science Cloud as an opportunity. But we have to be very careful, I think, because one of the things we found, and I find this a lot when I'm talking to people about the European Open Science Cloud, is this question of the word data. I've heard this referred to as a suitcase word, a word that means different things to different people. And this is, you know, some work that I did where we interviewed researchers working, computer scientists working in big data research. And one of the things we found is that mapping the practices, and particularly around the use of the word data, meant that the word data meant that the same word would be used in a computer science context that would be used, many different words were used in a humanities context. So this led us to think, okay, so if we're building this open science cloud for humanities research data, even calling it that is already going to create challenges for our community. So we need to soften this blow. And if you want to dig a little more into that, I don't know how many of you saw this, this Twitter feed that came through that Miriam Posner started about if someone were to call the sources you use data, what would your reaction be? And the reaction was data is numbers, data is pre-epistemic, data is derived, it's impoverished, it's simple, it's used a certain way, it's homogeneous, and basically data is suspect. It's a fetish. It is everything. It is in the eye of the beholder. All of this is coming straight from the Twitter feed. I didn't make this up. But again, I think if you work with humanists, you know this kind of impression where you're doing a presentation about data and you say, hey, how many of you guys have a data set? And they're like, oh, no, I don't work with data. You don't need to talk to me. And they're like, well, do you have a list of links that you use? Oh, yeah, no, I have a lot of search. And then the more you talk to them, the more you're going to realize that they have actually quite refined and large data sets. They just don't call them data. And some of the quotes I particularly liked from that Twitter feed, you know, there is this anxiety over the word data. But I particularly like the second one. Calling a source data means that person doesn't value it or respect its integrity. This is what we're up against. You know, the whole idea that to use that word is to sort of tear the sources from their context in this almost violating way. That's not something we want our community to feel like they have to do. There's also the sort of the neoliberal impulse. It makes all academic work scientific and matches language of natural and technological sciences. Now, we do this a lot in Europe anyway. I will call myself a scientist, or I'll say, well, we need to separate off the science from something else. And of course, when you ask us why, we'll say, well, it goes back to the German word for Wissenschaft, where you can have Geisteswissenschaft. You know, and it's great to have a German word to explain everything, better than Schadenfreude. But you know, there's still a lot of people for whom even the word science, as well as the word data, is something that is alienating. And we're not going to alienate our community. That's not what we're there for. But, you know, the hope at the bottom of Pandora's box is this last quote that data is, saying that data is quantifiable extracted numbers feels like we've given up the fight. I think it is giving up the fight. So part of our role as DARIAH is to make sure that we keep we keep a hand or a fist or whatever it is you keep in a fight, that we keep one of those in the fight to make sure that Europe doesn't move on with this whole idea of sharing data and just say, oh, you know, it's like open access monographs. You know, it's too hard. You guys, when you figure it out, you can come and catch up to the party. But, you know, for now, you just sit there with your big books. And I really dislike that because if we're going to have open science will not be open unless we have all the disciplines there. And I think this applies to data as well. So there's more to be done, though. So, okay, so we build this cloud. So we actually make it possible for people to find data, tools, services, whatever they need in a palatable, contextualized, rich, humanist-friendly way. But what if they then don't know what to do with it? So we look at the way we intervene in terms of training, education, and skills. And again, we're not a university. We don't offer master's programs in digital humanities. But we are actually creating knowledge, and it's a different kind of knowledge. It's more of an acculturation model, so we actually bring people in and they learn how to apply skills in a certain way. So we have a lot of training and skills development. The European tradition of transnational access and promoting mobility has been something that's baked into who we are as well. And strangely enough, we're also finding that a lot of people are building careers with us. And careers of a very different sort. A career that almost maps onto what the North Americans call the alternate academy. Is that a known term? Yeah? I mean, essentially that there's this para-academic class, people who do some research, maybe work in a research institution, but whose work is not actually primarily classified as research. It may be classified as technical work or service work or support work or project management, and that the sort of the research aspect gets downplayed in how their work is described. And actually, there was some really interesting work that James's lab did recently, kind of released a set of descriptions of roles which we haven't had before. So there's really a lot of work to do here. So if you imagine, go back to that marketplace that we're using, one of the things that we can use as this layer of context is some of the training materials we've developed. So for example, this is the Manage, Improve, and Open Up Your Research Data in the Parthenos Training Suite, which is, Parthenos is a cluster of research infrastructures, because, you know, why have just one? And this is a set of, this is very, you know, humanist-friendly language. We're not starting from, go build yourself a data management plan and, you know, talk about all these things, because once we start using the word data, we're already kind of behind. So we can integrate things like this. We can also integrate things like this. So this is the Standardization Survival Kit. If you've ever felt, you know, like you were lost in a sea of TEI, this is where you want to be. We have spokes aliens, Mork and Torque. They're available in multiple languages, talking about standards. But the Standardization Kit is really nice because what it's doing is it's looking at how you can apply standards just as you would apply elements in a cooking recipe. So I can recommend that as a resource as well. And also, this is the kind of thing where we can use this to contextualize what we're putting into the DARIAH Marketplace. But of course, none of this is going to work unless we're active in terms of policy. And so we are seeing that from a DARIAH point of view, influencing the policy landscape, supporting the leaders in terms of best practice in terms of policy-driven work, but also promoting good practice and encouraging people to think in terms of that are going to align them with policy. We're not going to say, here, read this massive policy document and then you'll understand how you should be doing your work. We'll say, actually, there will be opportunities for you if you understand your work in terms of these principles. So we don't teach people to do policy. We actually lead them to it and help them understand the value of it. So we want to kind of future-proof people against what might happen in the policy landscape and how this might affect their work. And of course, the digital is an important place for this because it's fast-moving. So some of the stuff we've done, again, the focus so far has largely been on open science because it's really been the elephant in the policy chamber in Europe recently. And already GDPR has been mentioned today, but Plan S, again, this is something that, you know, drives us demented, but maybe it hasn't made it to this side of the world yet. But again, the major funders of research coming together in Europe to push towards the implementation of open access to research publications, and of course our Cultural Heritage Reuse Charter. So a number of things that we're kind of doing from the bottom up and also from the top down, I suppose, depends on whether you consider us the bottom or the top, to help our researchers, to help start the right conversations. But of course, that also means it's something we have to project upward. So I spend a lot of time with these guys in gray suits. It's mostly guys, not entirely. And that's Commissioner Moidash in the center there. And that is, next to him is Carol Leubens, who is the head of the executive board of the European Open Science Cloud. This is a group of 25 people. They're there as representatives of stakeholders to drive European open science policy forward. Guess how many humanists there are? There's me. And here's the good news. You know, I sit there in the room and I say the same thing over and over. And here's the bad news, is I sit there in the room and I say the same things over and over. So we find that, you know, it is really important to make sure that the humanities voice is heard in these places. And we realized that there was an absolute gap there. And whether you consider this kind of advocacy to be infrastructure or not, is a real question of how you see that connecting role. What is it that the community needs to make sure that they are able to be connected, to be aware, to be that little next level up? And we consider this an important part, again, as a part of what we do in the marketplace. If we do the marketplace without the policy work, then we won't have the success that we want, not for us and not for our community. So I hope that gives you a sense of who we are and what we might be able to offer, but also I'm really curious to hear how we might work together. So my last slide has disappeared, so I'll stay on. You don't want to stay on that slide. I'll go to the next slide. You know, just the idea of, so what's next? You know, what can we do together? I'd love to end on that question and hand it over to you. So thank you for your patience and kind listening.